Oh, that's good because we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 10 of PSPowerHour. My name is James Petty, and today we have the one and only Josh King right over here to my left, or right, depending on how it's mirrored. And right below me, we have the one and only Mr. Thomas Rayner. How's it going, guys?
Good. Yourself?
Doing well. What time is it on the other side of the world right now?
It's just gone 10 a.m.
10 a.m., so it's
And,
tomorrow.
and apparently, yes, tomorrow. And apparently, we're having a birthday party in the cafeteria next door. So,
Oh,
if we
birthday
hear
cake.
little party horns or anything going off, that's what it is.
So, Thomas, how's Seattle treating you?
Good. Still got some nice weather. The leaves are just beginning to turn. It's so romantic over here. Yeah, life's good. It's been a couple of minutes since I've co-hosted, but super excited to have Josh here today. I presented for Josh's user group, July, was it? In and around there. Somehow I got screwed on the time zones, but this is working out. So I'm glad we could get Josh in at a reasonable hour his time. So that's a blessing to be able to hook this up.
Oh yeah. So I guess for those of you that were watching, so I know myself and Josh, along with Mike Kanaskas and Joey and Sydney, so we hosted a table talk at Ignite last week. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, so even though, so I guess for those that don't know, Josh is out in New Zealand. Josh, introduce yourself. I guess we kind of forgot that.
Yeah, I've got a slide on it, but I guess we can skip through that. Yeah, so I'm Josh King. You can find me most places online as Windows NZ. Obviously, the NZ being New Zealand. I am a sysadmin here at Tribe. We're an MSP in one of the sunnier parts of New Zealand. And in fact, the picture behind me, plastered all over the wall, is one of the local beaches. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP. And I guess my niche is what we're about to head into, which is toast notifications.
All right. Well, why don't you share your screen? I'll push the button and we can go for it.
Let's go share. All right. Let me know when you can see that.
Yeah, you're good.
Awesome. So this is sort of it's a more advanced presentation on toast notifications over what I've covered in the past. I have put references in here to previous talks, which cover some of the more basic stuff, and we're going to get sort of ramp up to speed real quick today. So like I said, I'm Josh King. Find me Windows NZ and my blog's toastit.dev. You might notice a theme there. And while, yes, this is going to dive into more advanced uses of toast notifications, I wanted to start with what is toast. And there's that link there, toast.click/toast basics. That'll take you to a previous presentation that I've done. So of course, we're not talking about toast like this. Funny thing is, this is the picture that shows up when I sign into my 365 tenant behind the login screen. So that greets me every time I put in my username. But we're not talking about that toast. Instead, we're talking about the modal notification things that pop up in almost every modern operating system. So you'll see them on your phone. That's a screenshot from Android. That's a screenshot from a Mac, and then of course Windows 10. They are meant to provide timely information to users, and often you can take actions based on those notifications. Now, I've got a module for displaying these notifications in Windows 10 and by extension Server 2019, and that module is called Burnt Toast, and we'll be using that through all of the demos today. There is a QR code down the bottom there which will take you to the gallery to download it if you're interested. And speaking of the gallery, it's hit 14 million downloads, or if you've been following the news, that number's just a little bit inflated due to a bug on the gallery at the moment. It's actually well under 1 million still. But I'm not going to shy away from taking a screenshot like that. So why burnt toast? Behind every toast notification is just a XML payload. And I'll be showing off XML through some of the demos that we're just about to get into. And that XML is fed through a Windows API, resulting in toast notifications. What you can do is you can edit that XML directly, but nobody wants to do that if they can avoid it, so that's where burnt toast comes in. Use burnt toast, which is a collection of PowerShell commands to effectively generate and then submit the notifications. There is a use case where you can use burnt toast to generate the XML and then store that payload as a reusable template for a wide toast push across a network without having to install burnt toast on every endpoint. And I've got a blog post about that at toast.click/noburnttoast. I think I referenced that a few times here. So that's enough of slides. Let's head over to some demos. And James, can you tell me if that's big enough? Actually,
yeah, I think make it just a little bigger. There we go. That's great.
There we go. So we're going to jump straight into what is a fairly simple toast, despite what the screen, how daunting this screen might look. So I might just run the thing and sort of point out the component parts. So if I run all that, you'll notice that took a while to come up. That's because this picture here is actually huge. And what it does is it downloads that to my local app data, so I had to wait for it to download. But going forward, it'll pull it, not app data, my local temp directory. Going forward, if I reference this image again, it just pulls it from my temp directory, so it goes really fast. And also, as long as I keep my mouse over this, it's going to stay there. So on line 1 there, the app icon, I want to be quick here because I don't want this to disappear. I specify the path of a GIF image and app logo override. That's this little thing down here. So if you don't provide an app logo, what it does is use the icon of the application that's generating the toast. And by default with burnt toast, that's Windows PowerShell. So if I hadn't supplied this, I'd get a little PowerShell icon and I wouldn't see Windows PowerShell down the bottom here. Because I'm overwriting it, Windows is going, all right, well, we still need to know who it's coming from. So it puts a little attribution tag down the bottom there. Then there's this hero image, which is the huge image up the top there. And these are both fed through this new BT image function. Then there's the text. There were 2 lines of text, and the top one is always the bold header. So the top one's bold, the second one is more of a body. And when it popped up, you may have, I hope you heard the sound. If not, imagine the Outlook ding when you get a new email. But I've specified there to use the mail, the new email sound. So those are all component parts. I've got 2 images, 2 pieces of text, and a thing of audio. I need to bind most of that together with this BT binding. And I chuck all of my text under children. Now, if I had an inline image rather than a hero image, I could pop that in there as well. So I'd go image 1 or whatever I called it. But if it's specifically a hero image or an app icon, I have to provide those directly against their own parameters. And then there's a few other steps to go through. That binding then gets into a visual element, and that visual element goes to content. And under the content is where I provide my audio. Then finally, armed with that content, I can go and submit it. That's actually sending it to the Windows APIs to be displayed on the screen. I mentioned sound. One of the recent Windows 10 update turned off a bunch of default notification sounds. So if you're running toasts and they're silent when you expect to actually hear something, there's a link in my demos there to sort that out. And there's a link to where to find these demos at the end. Now, the XML behind all of this looks a little something like this. So you'll notice I've got my binding, which encapsulates those two pieces of text and my two images. There inside a visual, and there inside this toast element, which you can think of as, well, the content, I guess. What you'll notice is this image source is pointing at my local temp directory, which is where I've downloaded those two internet-based images. But over the right, there is placement and app logo override and placement hero. If those tags weren't there, they would just be displayed inline. And you'll notice the text is in the order that I've provided them, and that's my header. So I don't think I showed that. When I'm supplying my children, the order here is the order that they would be displayed. So if I swap those around, my header would be not a header anymore. So just keep the order in mind. Actually, let me pull that one back up. Now, if I don't hover my mouse over it, it pops up and it should stick there for, I believe, 5 seconds, which is nowhere near long enough. If you want it longer, you can play with, jump into the wrong one, the duration. So this is a very simple toast again. This time, no hero image, but we've got 3 lines of text. Using a different sound, so instead of mail, it's now the Outlook reminder chime. The main difference here is that against the content, there's this duration parameter, and there's only 2 options on that: long and short. Short's the default. And long basically just makes it stay on screen for much longer. So I believe, if memory serves, this will stay up for 15 to 20 seconds. So we'll let that run out. While it's doing that, let's start looking at the XML. So again, we've got our binding, 3 sets of text, which I shouldn't have moused over that, it just reset. We've got our heading and 2 lines of text, which correlates to these. Got my my GIF app logo. The main difference here is under my toast element, there's now duration equals long. And that just tells the operating system to keep it on screen by X multiplier, and I think it's a 4 times multiplier. Oh, and of course the audio's changed from mail to reminder. Now, if you need your toast on screen for an obscene amount of time, what you can do, instead of specifying the duration, or as well as specifying the duration, although it doesn't actually matter, is to change the scenario. So as you can imagine, the use cases for toast for notifications can vary widely based app to app. So for example, Skype might pop up a toast saying, hey, someone's trying to call you. And ideally, you'd want to keep that notification on screen so that the user can accept it. for as long as possible, ideally until the caller ends up hanging up. Whereas if it's just a thing to say, hey, your report's done, you probably don't need that on screen for too long. So what we can do is under scenario, if I set this to incoming call, tells Windows to treat it as if Windows PowerShell is handling calls for some reason. And if I run it, and one other thing is, if you specify your scenario as incoming call, your sound has to be a one of these .looping .call something sounds. If you put anything else in here, it will default to the default call ringtone. So there's looping basically means that it can be looped. It's a bit longer of a thing, and it's designed to seamlessly loop. And there's a loop switch there to tell it to do that rather than just playing once. And there's two categories of looping. There's alarm and call. And there is an alarm scenario, but it, for whatever reason, doesn't stay on screen for as long as calls. If I run this, really hope you can hear it, but now it's playing a call. Awesome. So that's the alarm, the call ringtone. It's going to stay there. I'm really tempted to leave it on screen for as long as it will, but that'll get really annoying. So we might just go and dismiss it. Now, that will stay on for, it may even be upwards of a couple of minutes. I'm not willing to test it during a presentation because it'll drive everyone batty, especially if you can hear the sound. On the XML side, we can see under the toast element, there's now scenario incoming call, and the audio now specifies that .looping .call and loop set to true. And again, so if we didn't specify loop, the notification would still stay on screen for a long time. It just would only play the first round of the ringtone and it wouldn't loop back to the start and keep looping through. And you can loop other sounds. So if you have a regular toast, so it's not an incoming call, if you've got a regular toast and say you use the mail chime, you can loop that while it's on screen as well, which is really annoying because those things are designed to just be short and sharp. Now, I'm not going to show from this point on any more XML after showing you how to get the XML, if you're ever interested in seeing it. So what we've been doing so far is using those component functions, and we end up with an object called content1, and we would normally submit that using submit BT notification. There's a method on that content object called getContent, and if we run it, we get the XML. And I've pasted what that looks like in here, formatted a bit nicely so it's easier to read, and this is exactly the XML that we just saw, except you'll notice there's these curly braces around the text elements. This is to do with something that we'll see in Demo 6, to do with data binding, and I'll explain a little bit more then. But if we didn't strip those, they would show in the toast, which doesn't look great. So what we can do, if you're doing this manually, is you can grab that content and strip out all of those curly braces. And I wrote this a long time ago, so I could probably make it better now. But what it does, if we run it, you can see we've now got that XML again, but no curly braces. So there's what it is pasted out. Now, armed with that XML, you could store this off in a file, read it back in. But then how do you show it? Because now that it's raw XML, it's not actually a content object anymore, meaning you can't use submit BT notification to show it. So if you go this route, what you end up having to do is manually submitting it through to Windows. So we load that XML back into a Toast XML object, or XML document, I guess. We generate manually a new Toast notification, and we notify it through the notification manager. If we run this, we should get our Toast. No, and because I didn't actually run, yeah, sure. Because I'm not using the cleaned up stuff, you can see the curly braces. That was a happy little accident. Now, how this is shown here will only work on PowerShell version 7.1 with the latest version of Burnt Toast imported. Prior to that, you need to do some manual WinRT assembly loading, and there's some details at that address there. That's a blog post about basically storing those XML documents on a network share, so you can avoid installing Burnt Toast everywhere. And that's how you inspect the XML yourself if you're ever curious. So we're not going to look at XML anymore. Instead, let's look at what happens if you have a Toast notification with some information on it. That information becomes out of date and you want to update the user with more timely information. I'm going to start using this more simple function, which is sort of the entryway into Toast, just to drive just to make these demos a bit simpler. But with these Toasts, I'm going to be showing 2 lines of text. So I've got the header demo replacement, and then this is the first example line of text. I've also got this unique identifier parameter, and I've set it to a random string. It could be any string. The key is, if I ever want to update a Toast, my unique identifier has to be unique so that Windows can find the Toast that it's replacing. So if I run this, we get a Toast. If I run the second example, you can see it disappears and a new Toast shows up showing this is the second example line of text. So what I did is change my hash table there, changed the second line of text to this second example, and then used new Burnt Toast notification again to effectively show a new Toast, but because it had the same unique identifier, it ripped out the old one and replaced it. Now, you'll notice I left that second one to disappear into the Action Center. So if I run this third example, what's going to happen is it pops up again as if it's a brand new Toast. But if we look in the Action Center, we can see that there's only the third example there. So even though it was in the Action Center, it still removed it and replaced it. But as you can imagine, that's not all that seamless of a operation. So if I do the first one, do the second one, it rips it away rather abruptly, do the third one, rips it away, and we've got the third example. There is a better option, and it gets into why we've got those curly braces and everything, which is updating Toasts rather than replacing them. So again, I've got an ID, and I'm specifying this up the top so that I can use it in multiple places. And now I've got this data binding here. So data binding, there's a couple of uses for it. One that we're going to show here is this update thing. Another use case for it is localization of texts, localization of notifications. So if your app supports multiple languages, you can use data bindings to swap in and out different languages from your notifications based on where the toast is running or what the localization settings on the machine are. So a data binding, as far as we're concerned, is just a hash table. It gets converted into another format behind the scenes. But it's got key value pairs, and think of the keys as a placeholder. So in this example, my data binding has a heading placeholder and a text placeholder with, as you can imagine, a heading and some text. Within my notification, which is still just going through new burnt toast notification, I'm providing two sets of text. One is the heading, the placeholder for the heading, and the placeholder for the text, in the right order. I specify my unique identifier, and I pass in my data binding to this data binding parameter. Now, I'm not going to run that right away because I'll talk through the updates first. So this data binding here now has my two placeholders in it. If I want to update either of those, I can update the hash table. So in this case, I'm updating the text placeholder, and I'm making that the second example line of text again, that being the first one. But how I actually do the update is, instead of calling new burnt toast notification again, is I call update BT notification. Specify the unique identifier, pass in the data binding, and it turns out there's an error. There's an issue at the moment, which I've opened a issue about on the repo, where this is generating an error. I forget what the specifics of it are. It's generating an error despite it working. So for the sake of making the demo a bit cleaner, I've just told it to ignore that. So let's do our first toast. It pops up, and then while it's on screen, let's update it. So we can see seamlessly, without it disappearing and reappearing, it's now updated to the second example. Now, if we let that disappear, and just as a heads up, when you specify this data binding, behind the scenes, burnt toast is matching keys from your data binding hash table against text elements that have those curly braces around them. If it finds those curly braces that match a placeholder in your data binding, it doesn't strip those curly braces out. If it doesn't find something that matches, it does strip them out and just treats them like plain text. So if you happen to have a second text placeholder, but you don't specify it in your data binding, you will end up with the text placeholder too. So it's just something to keep in mind. Now we've let that go to the Action Center, and we can see our demo update. It's currently sitting on the second example. If I run this third example, we see down here it succeeded, but nothing popped up on screen. We don't have a new notification, but if I click in there, we can see it has updated behind the scenes. So as long as the toast is there, we can update it without having to interrupt the user again. So say this could be a weather update that the user doesn't need to be interrupted for, but they might like to check the Action Center every once in a while to see what it is at the moment. Now, if I get rid of that and try and update it, we get notification not found. So if you can only update a notification that exists, which is one of if you're actually trying to get information to a user, updating it isn't a reliable means of getting it to them unless you first verify that the notification's still there, and that's a little bit outside the scope of this. So really what you use this for is if it could be detrimental or an annoyance to have stale information and you want to just update it on the off chance that that it's still relevant. Now, data bindings can be used for more than just simple text on a notification. And this is sort of taking it, so it can be used for basically any text on a notification, including that and also values in specific places on almost anything on the notification, and that includes the data on progress bars. So if you've ever watched one of my live streams, it starts with a little progress bar thing that shows, the stream starting in 5 minutes, and it uses SimCity style loading messages, like something about indexing matrices and llamas and all of that sort of stuff. So I've got that going. What I've done to show off updating progress bars is reworked that to make it work in a toast notification. So we've got two progress bars via this BT progress bar. And you can see I've got a title, status, and value for each of them. And I've just got these placeholders in them. So parent title, parent status, child status, and so on. And then I've got this much bigger data binding here where my parent title is always going to stay the same, but I specified in my hash table anyway. And then I've got a status and a value. Notice this is an empty string. This is a actual integer rather than a string. And that's because the progress bar needs a decimal value or a double rather than a string to work. And then I've got an ID, which I'm keeping static. And then I've got some non-bound text. So that text won't have the curly braces around it, but it also then becomes not updatable. So that's important to note. If you remember, if you have, say if I set that parent title in the title of my progress bar and not in my data binding, I wouldn't be able to update it. In this case, I never update it, but putting it in my binding gives me the option of updating it later. So what I end up doing is calling my toast notification, passing in my text, specifying my unique identifier, which is this ID here, and then passing in my two progress bars, again, in the order that I want them to show. So my parent bar is above my child bar, so it's first in the list there. And then again, I've got my data binding. So that's going to show the initial toast with some rather boring progress bars. What I'm going to do though, is I'm going to load a function called start progress. Let's just kick this off before I go and open that. So we can see every time these progress bars move, that's the toast notification being updated. And while that's running, I'll take this opportunity for a drink. One thing to note is as long as you're updating the toast notification while it's on screen, it resets the timer for keeping it on screen. So the default timeout's something like 5 seconds. As long as you're updating, say, every 4 seconds, in this case it's every half a second, but as long as you're updating within that window, it'll stay on screen. So that's one way to keep a notification on screen if you absolutely have to. But then once the top bar gets to 100, it finishes, and then the timeout ticks over, so it should be 5 seconds, then it disappears. So if we have a look at that function, this is going to be a jumble of all sorts of random, because it's sort of a bastardization of what I have for my start stream function. Basically, I grab both the data binding and unique ID from my main toast, because I need those to update the toast notification. Then I've got a whole bunch of loading messages that I can pick from at random, deciding what message to display next. And then I do a whole bunch of stuff to work out how far through percentage-wise it is, how long it's been running, how long it's got left, picking a random message, etc. And then we've just got a while loop, a do loop. I'll skip over all of this crap. It is included in the repo if you do want to check it out and tinker with it. But effectively, this runs through and then updates my notification with an updated data binding every half a second until the end time's been reached. And that's based on this countdown here. So for my streams, that would be 5 minutes. For demoing today, I set it to 1 because that was a nice number to, get it on screen for a while. Now, if I run it again and I go and cancel it, we'll see the progress bars stop updating as you'd expect. The code's no longer running. Stays on screen for 5 seconds and then disappears. It's just showing there's no real magic keeping it on screen. It's just ticking away. Now, here's where we get into the more recent developments that I'm really excited about. And before we get too deep into events, I will say in the latest, basically 0.8 whatever of Burnt Toast, there's been a bug that I hadn't picked up until writing these demos that will mean you can't actually follow through on these demos yet. I've got a patched version that I'm running, but I haven't pushed that to the gallery yet. What would happen is you'll get a notification saying, well, actually, you'll get a error saying I can't display an error because it's null. There's a fix coming. So I mentioned right at the start that generally with toasts, the user should be able to take actions based on those. So say, and you might have a chat app that shows a toast. Potentially, you could see an app mention come through to you with a text box on it that you can type your reply, click reply, and in the background, the application handles taking that text and doing the reply. Or it might be a widget that does updates across your network, and the user gets a, hey, there's this update available, do you want it now or do you want to snooze it for an hour? So if they click I want it now, it'll actually go and run, say, Choco update or whatever the process actually is behind that. For the longest time, that wasn't possible through Burnt Toast, but with PowerShell 7.1, it finally is. And that's only because of an upstream change with the .NET team and some changes that forced. But happy accidents. Now we can run events based on interactions with toasts. So what we're going to be seeing here is a default looking notification. We're literally just running new burnt toast notification, but what's different here is we've got this activated action and this dismissed action, and these both just take script blocks. So anything you can script, you can put into a script block and execute it when that particular action happens with your notifications. So just to get an idea of what's happening behind those, I've got an activated and dismissed script block. If it's activated, it'll write a warning saying such. If it's dismissed, it'll show dismissed. And then so that outside of those events, I'm saving the event data into a global variable just so I can interact with it and see what it does. So if I run this, and I click this little arrow up here, I can see that my toast has been dismissed. Now, if I look at that toast event, I can see there's a bunch of information. Interestingly, so this object represents, actually no, part of this, right, the send, no, this is an event object. Inside it, under the source args, is information about the event that triggered the event, or the toast event, and the toast notification itself. So if I look at those source args, if I were to dive into this, I could see the XML content of that toast notification that triggered an event. I could see the data, so this is where your data binding disappears into. If there was a data binding, I would see it in there. If I had a unique ID against it, it would show under both group and tag. And there's other metadata hiding in there. But what I actually care about is the second object here, which tells me, so this is a dismissed event args object, and it tells me the reason why the toast was dismissed. So if I just look at that, I can see was user cancelled, and that's because I clicked that little arrow on the right-hand side. If I run this again and just let it time out, so I can see it's dismissed. This time, the reason is it timed out. Now, if I run it one more time, if I click the notification, so I'm not clicking the dismiss, the little arrow that sends it to the action center, I'm not letting it time out. I click the notification, it says activated. This time, it's a different type of object in there. It's an activated event args. And if I look at them, now there's three properties there, and the ones I care about are arguments and user input. We're not going to worry too much about those just yet. What I want to do is change up my dismissed, what's the name? Script block. So I'm going to change the warning that comes out based on the reason why it was dismissed. So if it timed out, that means the user didn't interact with it. So I'm going to assume they're asleep, and I'll tell them to wake up. If the user cancelled it, so I'm looking directly in those source inside the event, so it's directly against the event object. I'm looking at the reason, and if it's time out, I do that. If it's user cancelled, I say, fine, didn't want to talk to you. If it's anything else, I get a generic message. So if I run that, let it time out, I get, hey, wake up. Now if I do it again and dismiss it, I get the appropriate message. And again, if I activate it, I just get the generic activated. So what if I were to include a dismiss button? So you can set up buttons, and there are specific types of system buttons, those being snooze and dismiss. You would think that because you can do a system-generated dismiss button, that clicking it would dismiss the toast. So let's put that to the test. Now I've got my notification with this nice big dismiss button. If I click that, I expect to see dismissed because the user because the user cancelled the notification. But I click it, activated. That's not intuitive. Now, if I look at my source args, it is that one with 3 properties on it, meaning it was an activated event, which we already know because it said activated, and the arguments on it was dismiss. So that button has what's called an argument on it, or yeah, it's an argument of dismiss, and the type is system. That's still being treated as an activated event, which is really annoying. Oh, and by the way, that button ends up against the button parameter on New Burnt Toast. And again, you can provide multiple buttons. They'll display in the order that you specify them. So with that, I'm going to change my activated script block now, because I don't want, so if I'm expecting to take an action based on the user activating my toast, I don't actually consider clicking the dismissed button as being activating my toast, because that's stupid. So what I do is I look at my arguments on the source args. If it's dismiss, I'll say it's been actively dismissed. Anything else is activated, and I want to see the event. So if we update that and run it, and I click dismiss, I see actively dismissed. That means going forward, I can basically say, if it's dismissed, or if it's not dismissed, go and do what I'm expecting to do. Otherwise, just skip it. Oh, and of course, we've got those source args again. Now, something a little bit more complicated, I guess. This time, oh, right. When I run this, and we saw this right at the start, if I click the body to activate it, I see activated, but there's no arguments there. So how do I know that that's the argument, that's the action that my user took? Say I had a button and the user didn't click the button, should I just assume they clicked the button? What if I had multiple buttons and then they clicked the toast? Which button do I assume they clicked? So what you can do is, and you have to break it out into the component things rather than just new burnt toast notification. But if we scroll all the way down to BT content, there's a launch parameter there. And against that, you can provide a string that shows up in your arguments when you click the toast itself. So it's effectively the argument for the entire toast rather than a component button or something else. So if I run this, I get the note. Oh, and by the way, that this here is the component parts that make up a default notification, including finding the burnt toast logo or photo, using that as the app logo. It's the default sound, all of that stuff. but I had to split it out to that to get to the launch. So if I click it, I see it's been activated. Now if I look at my source args, I can see, hey look, that was a body click. Awesome. So what I need to make sure is if I'm putting multiple buttons or ways of activating my toasts, and it matters, and if it matters which the user does, I need to make sure I've got unique arguments against each of them. And that way, in my code, I can pick out what the argument was and branch off into different blocks of code based on what the outcome there was. So that's a primer on events. Now, what can we actually do with that? So again, calling back to my stream, if I'm playing music, I like to show toast notifications to say, this is what the current song is. And I use an app called MusicBee, but it's got a plugin that can write that information and the album art to disk. So in my real example, I wrap a file system watcher around it to see when this text file changes. And when the text file changes, the script runs, it shows me a toast notification with the information that I want. Instead of relying on MusicBee and playing copyrighted music on stream, on today's call, I've just taken a snapshot of it at a point in time. So I've got a text file sitting under, in fact, it is music tags. So it's a tab delimited CSV file, and we've also got cover art. Cool. So what I need to do, oh, I was starting halfway down the example. No, I was starting on the last. Let's do that one first, since I'm halfway through explaining it. Wow, cool. So that is a tab delimited CSV file. So I import it using import CSV. I tell it to delimiter, the delimiter is a tab. And my headings, which you'll notice were missing from that text file, were artist, albums, year, and title. What I want to do with that information is show it in a nice way on a toast notification. Ideally, I want a label and the information next to it, which I can't do normally. And what I have to use is technically called adaptive groups, but what in Burnt Toast we've called columns, just to make it easier to grok what it does. So I'm going to provide a header. Now this is it actually a header? Yes, it is. Okay, so I've got a header saying now playing. Then I, again, grab my Burnt Toast picture and use that as my app logo. And what I'm going to do is have a inline image that's the cover art. So this is different than the hero image that we showed at the start. This one shows underneath the text and it's not the full width. The reason why I went that route instead of hero images is the hero images have a fixed height, and it was only showing, say, the top third of the album cover, and I wanted to see the whole thing. Where this deviates from what we've seen in the past is I'm creating a whole bunch of text elements, 6 in total, where I've got text, so I've got title, album, artist, and then I've got the information coming from that CSV file. But what I can use with these adaptive groups or columns is I can specify styles. So if I look at that, there is a bunch of them. And you normally can't use them. So until I got, these have always been in the Burnt Toast code, but they've never done anything. And it turns out that's because they only do something within adaptive groups. So I have my labels, and then I have the actual information. These ones are styled as base, and these are base subtle. And you'll see what the difference between those are in a sec. Then we put all of those, the labels and the information, into columns using a new BT column, and those are saved into column variables. These are specified the same as if you just normal text on a notification. Again, the order that you put them in here is the order that they'll show on the toast. So if you want them to line up, you have to put title with title, album with album, artist with artist. The other thing here is this weight. And these, if you've got multiple columns, the weight dictates how much relative space the different columns take between each other. So in theory, column 2 should be 3 times larger than column 1 because it's 2 versus 6. And in theory, putting 1 and 3 should have the same effect. I'm not going to test that. The other thing you can do with these columns is text stacking. So if you're going to have a lot of information in one column, not a lot in the next, what you can do is specify what vertical alignment do you want for the column. So do you want it in the middle? Do you want it at the bottom? Do you want it at the top? That doesn't come into play here because my 2 columns are the same height. And then we've just got a normal, reasonably normal toast. I want it silent because it is telling me about music. I don't want it to interrupt the music. Then I specify my children here. So this is that header piece of text and album art. Notice these are both the text and the image going against children. It doesn't actually matter which order these two are in because the image is always going to be underneath the text. But just out of habit, if I'm expecting to see it later in the toast, I'll put it later in the children. Then I specify my children and my app logo. And I found showing the notification on the stream for 4 to 5 seconds was nowhere near long enough, so I make it show up for long. If I run this, there we go. So I've got now playing. There's the app logo. There's the app logo. There's the attribution for the app that's actually running the toast. And then I see the inline image. Now those columns that we created are these here. They show at the absolute bottom of the notification, even under these images. But what you can see is this is bold. This is bold, but smaller and grey. And it all lines up. So the title of the track, the album, I've got those 2 backwards. I'm not going to fix that. But you get the idea. So you can have multiple columns. They can run off the side of the notification, which is a pain. In fact, I originally tried to put the album art here, and it just showed it at full size, so I saw literally the corner, which wasn't very helpful. So that's columns. They're really useful for showing dense amounts of detailed information. Circling back to events.
All right, why, Josh? Hey, Josh,
Yep.
I really hate to cut you off, but we are at the top of the hour, so we have ran out of time for the day.
I won't explain this then. I'll just run it, and people can inspect the code if they want to.
All right, that'll work. Yeah, we got a few questions for you after that.
Okay, sure. So if I run this, it pops up a selection box. I can choose from here, say Bob Ross, click submit. Another toast notification pops up as an event, choosing the GIF based on what I chose from the selection box. All right.
All right. Well, that was some fantastic information. I know a couple people in the chat saying they were using burnt toast and really like it.
Awesome.
Yeah, but just some questions that I kind of jotted down while we were going through was at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that you were running Windows PowerShell, and then later on you mentioned that a piece of it only worked in 7.1 with the newest version. So does this run? Is it kind of run on Windows PowerShell and 7, or like how does that work? Or did I mishear you?
So the new stuff only works on PowerShell 7.1, the event stuff, and you'll notice all of the demos that I ran today were in 7.1.
Okay.
I may have misspoken at one point. Oh, actually, no, I think I know what it was. This bit here, where I've got this note about it only, if you're using Windows PowerShell, there's some extra steps you need to take, but they're documented in the blog post.
Awesome. And then I guess you're talking about opening issues. So have you open sourced your module?
I have. So if we, yes, it's. Oh, by the way, all of this stuff's already up on my at toast.click/talks.
All right, perfect.
I believe if you go to toast.click/GitHub,
it'll take you right there.
Should take you to the repo as well. Let me check if that wants to pop up.
And I guess while that's loading, you talked about toast notifications on Android and on the Mac, but I'm assuming this is only Windows. It's not cross-platform.
Only Windows. Yep.
Okay.
There is a project. Oh, yeah. Search all of GitHub. There is a project called Posh Notify, which happens to live under me, but several others have put in a lot of work. This is cross-platform, and it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So a couple of others. So I contributed the Windows part. Someone else did. Might have been Tyler did the Mac part. Someone else did Linux. So we've sort of abstracted away the OS specific stuff and just made it.
Now, is all of your new stuff automatically uploaded into this Posh Notify?
No. So what we've done because of that abstraction, we've tried to limit the OS specific stuff.
Okay.
So it tends to be just the app logo and some text. Keep it as the idea being then you can put it in your cross-platform scripts and get a notification regardless of where you are.
Awesome.
It does need a bit of an update. It's been
2 years. Is that what it says?
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, we appreciate it. Just let everyone know that kind of our next